As soon as he fell asleep, he experienced a hideous nightmare. He dreamed that a persistent scratching sound woke him up, that he arose, lit a candle, and looked at the chest. The protruding finger showed just under the lid, and this time it was galvanized with an excess of life. It twisted and turned, drummed with its thick knuckles, scratched frantically with its flat black nail. At length, as if it suddenly became aware of his presence, it became perfectly still, and then very deliberately beckoned for him to approach. Flooded with horror, he nevertheless found himself unable to disobey. Setting down the candle, he slowly crossed the room like an automaton. The monstrous beckoning finger drew him on like some infernal magnet which attracted human flesh instead of metal. As he reached the chest, the finger darted inside, and the lid immediately lifted. Overwhelmed with terror, and yet utterly unable to stop himself, he stepped into the chest, sat down, drew his knees up to his chin, and turned onto his side. A second later, the lid slammed shut, and he heard the iron key turn in the lock. At this point in the nightmare, he awoke with a ringing scream. He sat up in bed and felt the sweat of fear running down his face. In spite of the nightmare, or because of it, he dared not get up and switch on the light. Instead, he burrowed under the bedclothes and lay wide awake until morning. After he had regained some measure of self-composure, he went out for black coffee and then, instead of reporting to his job, rode across town to the modest home of a truck driver and mover whom he had hired at various times in the past. After some quite detailed and specific plans had been agreed upon, he paid the mover $10 and departed with a promise to pay him an equal amount when the job was done. After lunch, considerably relieved, he went to work. He entered his room that evening with a confident air, but as soon as he looked around, his heart sank. Contrary to instructions, the mover had not picked up the chest. It remained in the corner, just where it had been. This time, Max was more depressed than angry. He sought out a telephone and called up the mover. The man was profusely apologetic. His truck had broken down, he explained, just as he was starting out to pick up the chest. The repairs were nearly completed, however, and he would absolutely be out to carry off the chest the first thing in the morning. Since there was nothing else he could do, Max thanked him and hung up. Finding himself unusually reluctant to return to his room, he ate a leisurely dinner at a nearby restaurant and later attended a movie. After the movie, he stopped and had a hot chocolate. It was nearly midnight before he got back to his room. In spite of his nightmare of the previous evening, he found himself looking forward to bed. He had lost almost an entire night's sleep, and he was beginning to feel the strain. After assuring himself that the Calamander chest was securely locked, he slipped the iron key under his pillow and got into bed. In spite of his uneasiness, he soon fell asleep. Some hours later, he awoke suddenly and sat up. His heart was pounding. For a moment, he was not aware of what had awakened him. Then he heard it. A furious scratching, tapping, thumping sound came from one corner of the room. Trembling violently, he got out of bed, crossed the room, and pressed the button on his reading lamp. Nothing happened. Either the electricity was shut off, or the light bulb had burned out. He pulled open a drawer of the lampstand and frantically searched for a candle. By the time he found one and applied a match to its wick, the scratching sound had redoubled in intensity. The entire room seemed filled with it. Shuddering, he lifted the candle and started across the room toward the Calamander chest. As the wavering light of the candle flickered into the far corner, he saw the finger. It protruded far out of the chest, and it was writhing with furious life. It thrummed and twisted, dug at the chest with its horrible black nail, tapped and turned in an absolute frenzy of movement. Suddenly, as he advanced, it became absolutely still. It hung down limp. Engulfed with terror, Max was convinced that it had become aware of his approach and was now watching him. When he was halfway across the room, the finger slowly lifted and deliberately beckoned to him. With a rush of renewed horror, Max remembered the ghastly events of his dream. Yet, as in the nightmare, he found himself utterly unable to disobey that diabolical summons. He went on like a man in a trance. Early the next morning, the mover and his assistant were let into Max's room by the landlady. Max had apparently already left for work, but there was no need of his presence, since he had already given the mover detailed instructions in regard to the disposal of the chest. The chest, locked but without a key, stood in one corner of the room. The melted wax remains of a candle, burned to the end of its wick, lay nearby. The landlady shook her head. "A good way to burn the house down," she complained. "I'll have to speak to Mr. Max. Not like him to be so careless." The movers, burdened with the chest, paid no attention to her. The assistant growled as they started down the stairs. "Must be lined with lead. Never knew a chest so heavy before." "Heavy wood," his companion commented shortly, not wishing to waste his breath. "Wonder why he's dumping such a good chest?" the assistant asked later as the truck approached an abandoned quarry near the edge of town. The chief mover glanced at him slyly. "I guess I know," he said. "He bought it of Jason Kinkle, and Kinkle never told him the story on it. But he found out later, I figure, and that's why he's ditching it." The assistant's interest picked up. "What's the story?" he asked. They drove into the quarry grounds and got out of the truck. "Kinkle bought it dirt cheap at an auction," the mover explained as they lifted out the chest. "Auction of old Henry Stubberton's furniture." The assistant's eyes widened as they started up a steep slope with the chest. "You mean the Stubberton they found murdered in a chest," the mover finished for him. "This chest." Neither spoke again until they set down the chest at the edge of a steep quarry shaft. Glancing down at the deep water which filled the bottom of the shaft, the mover wiped the sweat from his face. "A pretty sight, they say he was, all doubled up and turning black. Seems he wasn't dead when they shut him in, though. They say he must have tried to claw his way out. When they opened the chest, they found one of his fingers jammed up under the lid near the lock. Tried to pick the lock with his fingernail, it looked like." The assistant shuddered. "Let's be rid of it, then. It's bad luck, sure." The mover nodded. "Take hold and shove." They strained together, and in another second the Calamander Chest slipped over the edge of the quarry and hurtled toward the pool of black water far below. There was one terrific splash, and then it sank from sight like a stone. "That's good riddance, and another tenner for me," the mover commented. Oddly enough, however, he never collected the tenner, for after that day Mr. Ernest Max dropped completely out of sight. He was never seen or heard of again. The disgruntled mover, never on the best of terms with the police, shrugged off the loss of the tenner and neglected to report the disposal of the chest. And since the landlady had never learned the mover's name, nor where he intended taking the chest, her sparse information was no help in the search. The police concluded that Max had got into some scrape, changed his name, and effected a permanent change of locale.